Hello everyone and welcome to this week's That's Mental Mate with me, Brad. I'm joined this week by podcaster, counsellor, comic, Mr. Luke McGibbon.
Hello, Mr. Brad. We've literally just met as well there just about 5 minutes ago, and I'm in his living room. Dining room. See,
Not a very fancy podcast studio.
That's how little I know Brad. That I'm like I don't even know what fucking room this is. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
No problem. So we start the podcast every week asking our guests how they are.
Oh, that's a good way to start. I also like that you put the specific emphasis on it, because it's one thing to say, ask about your mates and stuff, as all the mental health campaigns say, but like you can very easily say, how are you, in a
nonchalant.
Say, yeah, and if you're nonchalant in your question, you're nonchalant in your answer. Usually, if you say how are you, someone will go, I'm fine, and you'll get nothing out of them. But yeah, no, I'm good. It makes me think of this thing. I put this thing in my calendar. I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but like every 6 weeks I have a Google Calendar reminder that says, are you happy? Because I think sometimes you need to genuinely ask yourself that in the same way that you just did, to say, what's going on? Is that something you like? Because I do think sometimes being in a shite situation, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Being in a shite situation can be something that sneaks up on you. Yeah, I suppose bad relationships, bad jobs, things like that. It's like, it's not a matter of you wake up one morning and you're like, oh, this is terrible. It's more like
creeps up on you.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I'm talking about situations, but really it can also just be the feeling of depression. As well, can be something that the old metaphor is the boiling frog, that like if you throw a frog into some boiling water, it'll jump out, but if you put a frog into some normal water and slowly boil it, the frog will not realise that it's boiling because it's gradual. But that's a very long way of saying, yeah, I'm grand. I'm good for it, yeah.
That's a very interesting thing to do though. Like I know we were saying about making a point of asking. I think that's as in a Roman Kemp the documentary, Ask Twice, how are you? Oh no, really, how are you, kind of thing.
So I think that, yeah. It's kind of, isn't that funny that that's also probably the best way to determine if someone's lying as well. Like not just say like how are you twice, but also if someone's lying to you. I'm in a relationship now 6 years, and sometimes I might tell a little fib or something, or I'll give an answer that I've not thought through really, which is probably closer to what I do, to be honest. And my partner will say, is that true? And I'll go, yeah, and I'll just say, is it actually though? And then I'm like, no. It's the you can project compassion to people and give them space to speak, but sometimes you need to do it twice just to sort of, it's like a reassurance thing, I think, to go, actually though, how are you though, really? It's to I suppose it's to demonstrate I authentically give a shit about your answer. There's a big part of it. I'm sorry, just for your listeners, Brad's nodding. Just didn't really think I was just going to talk over you the whole podcast.
No, well, that's what you're here for, isn't it?
I don't know. I thought, well, it depends. If you prefer it as a discussion, or I could just word vomit, comedy or psychotherapeutic knowledge, I don't know.
Probably a bit of both.
A bit of both, sure. I do think most things work better in dialogue, all the evidence backing towards, because, there's now, there's at least 500 different kinds of therapy out there. There's always a lot of debating within the evidence of whether or not, which one's the best, and it's kind of missing the point really. But what seems to come up again and again is, there's obviously some standouts, like CBT has a lot of good evidence behind it, but really, it's not that much about technique, though, obviously that can help, but it's always about the relationship between therapist and client, so what's going on between you, that's really what heals, and that might sound vague and unhelpful, but to me it's actually quite uplifting, because, maybe people might say, well, I've tried therapy before and it didn't really work, and it's like, well, tell me about that therapy, and they'll say, well, the person didn't really listen to me, they didn't really connect to me. Oh god, the first therapist I ever had was dog shit. He answered a phone call during the session. He interrupted me by holding up a finger once, just, when someone goes he didn't even say stop, he just went
like Simon Cowell in the X Factor.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna stop you right there. It's a no from me. Yeah, meanwhile I'm fucking weeping. God, God, he was shit. But do you know, there's as much to be learned from bad therapy as from good therapy. Yeah, so like to me it's uplifting because you can take that as all counselling is shit, which it would be if it were all about technique, but to me that says, well, that's not a person who gelled with you, and you know, that's not your fault that they didn't gel with you. It might not even be their fault. It's about what's between you rather than you or them. And I'm sure if you find a therapist that you get along with, you know, I'm not promising magic or cure, but maybe things might be a little bit more successful. I don't know, but I don't want also to sound like I'm pushing either, because I think what's really important when talking to people about mental health, not even just as a therapist, but like as a person, is what we were just talking about the I'm not crying, I'm burping, the intent of showing the intent that you care about someone's answer. So like, you know, if you know something really worked for you mentally and someone says, oh, I'm struggling, and you say, well, I don't know, let's say your thing is running, like maybe you find that running really helped your mental health, and someone says, oh, I'm struggling, you say, well, you could try going for a run, that really worked for me. And like, what you said is not incorrect, but it is unhelpful to the person, because they've said, I am feeling this pain, and when you say a suggestion, they take that as, I don't want to hear it, you should go for this run, you know, which is not what you're saying, but it can be how it is received. Like, some people do that to avoid having an honest chat, because talking about these things is uncomfortable for both parties, but it's much better, again, for both parties to sit with it and actually sort of demonstrate willingness to hear it, because being prescriptive and giving advice straight off the bat can come across as like, you do this and fuck off. And yeah, so and not to say there's no place for advice, but that it comes after the relationship is established, or after a sort of environment is created where someone feels like they can say anything. Yeah, I guess it comes back to like it's asking twice, or sussing out someone who's telling a fib by sort of like, when someone says, are you lying? They say no, and they say, are you lying? And like, what you're doing is you're saying, you can say it, you know. It's safe, and perhaps there's some relief there. What are we talking about?
I suppose that's the point. The whole point of the podcast is because it's uncomfortable conversations, and it's like, I've got some very brave people coming on and having them quite awkward, sometimes hard conversations. Can I ask, you said that your first counsellor, first therapist was dog shit.
Yeah.
What made you actually want to go into the profession after that? Just because it was so bad you thought you could do a better job? Or
do you know, that's maybe good. I hadn't thought of that, but maybe, you know, because like I feel like that about comedy, actually, because I run a wee open mic on the Ormo Road, but like one of the things that really made me want to do, well, I wanted to do comedy before that, but one of the things that really cemented it for me was seeing somebody do quite badly, and like I went, well, fucking I can do better than that. But also, it wasn't just that he was doing badly, but he was also quite comfortable doing badly. He was like on stage, and like if a joke didn't land, he would just do this weird awkward giggle, and it sort of made it feel alright. Did I say, why do I still want to do it? I you know, it's weird because quite a lot of early experiences with counselling were quite bad, actually. The Belfast CPT college, like I applied for that whenever I was finished my first degree, my only degree. They interview, but they don't tell you that the interview is also like a counselling session. So it's like you're trying to like talk about your skills, and they're like, yeah, what about your brother though? And like, do you want me to cry? Will that get me in here? And it's like, and they were like, he was doing this thing as well where they were like, what would you feel about people who say that you might be like too young or not have enough life experience to do therapy? And I was like, I think that's a really rude question. No, I didn't at the time because I was 21, and I was like, well, that's obviously a legitimate question, but I'm like, at what point does somebody have enough quote unquote life experience to be able to do that job? Like, what do you want to have happen to me? But where's the line there? Where was the line for you, madam, that you suddenly were able to be qualified? So quite a lot of early bad experiences with counselling based on that, and the first counsellor. I think I had wanted to before, and I think sometimes opposition can be quite motivating. Before I did stand-up, I told somebody that I wanted to try it, and they said, oh, I don't think your stand-up funny. And I think of that all the time. I use that to motivate me sometimes, but I mean, the thing is, you know, you don't want to lean too hard on any sort of motivational tool that involves creating opposition in your head. So I don't lean on that too much, but because also you could use that whenever somebody gives you good advice, like you're low on petrol, you might go, well, they told me I couldn't do stand-up, so and then you end up stranded on the side of a motorway near Moygashill. You've got no fucking petrol. But I think I just stubbornness really is the answer there. I still wanted to do it, and partly because I thought I could do better, though I didn't really know that was wrong at the time either. I did get something out of the sessions with that guy. But I got a lot more out of, like, whenever you do the study and they make you go to counselling, they make you find a private therapist and see them for like 30 sessions, and saw a guy called Peter Leach who's really good, and that was much better for me, because you could get a bit more in depth, because the person I'd seen who was shy he was there for 6 sessions. I think I would have been like 19 years old, not really knowing anything about myself really. So yeah, that was my first experience counselling. I think I always wanted to do it before that, because like whenever I was like a teenager, I had a lot of very depressed friends, and I would have a lot of conversations with them about that. I don't think I was helpful in the least. I was very prescriptive. I was like, well, that's what worked for me, you can do that. It's probably making everything worse, but it was something I found rewarding, and it made me keep doing it, and I mean, I suppose I can't have been too bad. I stayed up to like 2 a.m. chatting to people about things, and probably getting nowhere, but like, again, showing intent. Carl Rogers, who's sort of my pin-up counselling theorist, he's my Scarface poster on my wall basically. Well, one of his biggest things that's applied to therapy now is, he said that like, for change to happen, because he was a psychoanalyst first, so he would have been doing dream analysis and talking about the unconscious and tell me about your mum and dad and all, which has its place, but I think here he was saying that actually what really worked was whenever I started asking them just questions about their feelings, and he sort of summed up his research as saying that, like, for somebody to make a change, you have to create a certain environment as a therapist, and and he gave these 6 core conditions, and there's only really 3 of them that come from you. The others ones are more ambient, so I'll focus on the 3, but like, those conditions would be sort of, empathy, obviously, which is described as like being able to walk in another person's shoes. I'd say it goes a little bit further, and it would be about validating someone's emotions rather than, say, encouraging them to repress it, or telling them that you don't want to hear it, which we talked about with prescriptiveness. It would be about creating room for somebody. Or there's this guy called Kharkov who did this thing called an empathy scale. So this is how they proved that empathy was such a useful core condition. They came up with a scale of measuring how empathic a statement is. So like, the lowest level would be like, I don't want to hear it, and then there would be like a slightly higher level would be okay, and then it would sort of active listening, then a little bit higher than that would be, oh, that must have been hard for you, Then the highest level is something called advanced empathy, which would be, I suppose, reflecting an emotion back to them that they might not even have realised they had. So it's like, the classic example is maybe when someone's grieving, you would assume there's sadness, but there's probably anger there as well, and sometimes that anger is disenfranchised because it feels irrational, like, oh, I don't want to be angry at this person because they're dead, and it's like, well, and yet, you still feel anger deep down because this person in a way left you, No, obviously I don't put it like that, but I would say, well, there must be some frustration there, that there's some things that you don't get to say to this person, and so that would be an advanced empathic statement, because they've not mentioned anger yet, but now you've mentioned it. If you're correct, and suddenly there's a feeling of sort of release, or I suppose at least feeling held, because that emotion wasn't even accepted by the person, let alone in awareness. So empathy is the first core condition. The second one is congruence, which is like, in its most simple definition, you would say genuineness. It's being real with somebody, and that way that they know that your empathy is real as well, that you're being authentic when you say, that must have been really hard for you, oh, I'm so sorry you went through that. You're not just going through the motions. But on a deeper level, it's also kind of more it's a process, not a place, but congruence really is like having your thoughts and feelings and what you're displaying be entirely in line. So the example they liked to give a lot in counselling teaching was always like, if someone's boring you, you should tell them, almost. And I don't think maybe that's the way to put it. I think, it wouldn't be helpful for a counsellor to go, you're boring as fuck. But what you can do is be in line, because if you're hiding that you're bored, people's ability to tell how you're feeling is always much better than you think it is. So rather than saying you're boring me, it would be more noticing that you're bored and finding a way to communicate what's going on here. So maybe you're bored because you're like, this person's saying the same thing over and over again, or they're talking in circles, or maybe they're talking about something that's completely aside from what's clearly the main issue. So you might say, well, I notice you're talking a lot about X here, but I wonder if maybe you're doing this because you feel like avoiding Y or Z, and that way I'm managing to congruently communicate what's coming out of feeling bored rather than just saying you're boring. So congruence is being fully in line in sort of action and thought and feeling. And as I say, that's fucking easier said than done. That's you can't always be that, but you should certainly try. And then the last one is something called, the last core condition is something called unconditional positive regard, which is sometimes simply shortened to non-judgment, which is probably one of the best ways to put it. Carl Rogers originally used the word prizing, to prize somebody, or it was a non-possessive warmth. And I think this is what we're talking about with asking twice. It's because if you just ask twice, you could do it in a dickheaded way that doesn't encourage openness at all. You could say, how are you? And they go, fine. You go, how are you really? And then they can tell you're still going through the motions. Whereas if you convey warmth, then it's an interest in what someone's saying. That to me is unconditional positive regard, but it's also non-judgment in the strongest sense of the word. Sometimes perhaps in therapy someone might confess to you that they are something horrible, maybe they've cheated on a partner, or maybe they are a paedophile even, and they're not going to feel comfortable telling you that if you're not conveying that they won't be judged for this. Again, in counselling school, paedophile is always the example they give you, because they're like, you're going to have to be non-judgmental, they'll sort of go, they always go, what if someone's racist, what if someone's a paedophile, they always throw that at you. Perhaps maybe I shouldn't go on with that example, because now I imagine there might be listeners saying what's the value in being non-judgmental towards a paedophile? And I'm saying that perhaps a lot of paedophiles that I've worked with and spoken to would be what's known as a reluctant paedophile, or they're not even a paedophile, but they're terrified of being one. A lot of people with schizophrenia would have delusions that people are going to accuse them of being a paedophile, or something like that anyway, but they're not going to be able to talk about it and explore it and work through it. Crucially, if they never talk about it, that which is repressed tends to come back stronger in other forms usually. So anyway, so those are the 3 core conditions, and it's sort of my, I always feel like, if I have a bad session with somebody, I can always say to myself, well, were you giving them the 3 core conditions? If somebody tells me that they had a bad experience with therapy and I ask them about it, usually they will describe someone failing at the core conditions. That's the big thing for me. Have you had a therapist before, Brad?
Yeah, well, I had a few, and then I had one that I found really helped, but I was attacked about 10 years ago, so I suffered from post-traumatic stress, and I was seeing one, and they recommended EMDR, eye movement detected, but I had one session because I thought it was the biggest pile of shit ever, because my brain blocked off what happened. So I just remember waking up in my kitchen covered in blood and don't remember how I got home, and she kind of put stones in my hands that were vibrating, and she was like, think about when you were walking, and what do you smell? Grass. What do you see? Grass. Okay. And then 5 minutes of silence, and then what do you see? And I'm like, grass. so I was moving cities 2 weeks later anyway, so I just I'm not doing that again. And then I went back whenever I moved to the next city, and I went to a few different ones because I just kept getting passed around, and then eventually they just kind of went, we don't know what else to do with you. We can't really.
Right.
We kind of had a stump as to what we can do, and then it went private, and I thought I was getting somewhere with her, but she was more interested in my previous, like, you know, like childhood, that kind of thing, where I was like, I'm not here to talk about that, and she was like, yeah, but things can be affecting, which I do understand now. And then she went off in the sick, and then I just went, no, that's it, I'm fine. And then that was for a good few years. I think that was about 5 years I didn't see one. And then I was working in retail during COVID, and I just had a mental breakdown completely. Like I've had respiratory problems in the past, so like my aunties and all were like constantly ringing me being like, you shouldn't be working. We weren't an essential business to be open during the pandemic at all. They had like a workaround because we were inside a supermarket. That's how we were able to keep afloat. We were one of 4 in Northern Ireland open, so we had people coming from all over Northern Ireland to the store. We were a really tiny store, so we didn't have the capacity, and it was just so stressful, and I was so stressed, and the way people were talking to me, and obviously you were scared of getting this at the time we thought was the plague. So I just had a complete mental breakdown and started seeing a therapist again, because I was starting to feel suicidal basically, and started to see one, and he helped massively, but I was like a bit iffy going back. But I think I just needed to talk about it. I just needed to vent, because I was talking to my friends, being like, oh, this so and so said this today, and this customer and they were just like, okay, because they couldn't empathize, because they weren't. It's not their fault, I'm not shitting on them, but it's just obviously he had the tools to bring it out of me.
Sure.
I found it strange too, because I did see him for a couple, like I think I seen him for about a year, and then now we just kind of, he's on the other end of the phone if I need an emergency kind of call. This was going to be my next question to you. Was going to be like, was this not strange? Because I didn't study it, but I know from past experience, like he was, and what about this? And I go, I know I'm doing this and this and this and this, and he's just got easy money from me, like, because I just told myself what I was doing. I was like, yeah, but I'm self-sabotaging. Yeah, it's well, whatever else I was naming off. I'm not worried of anything else, but it was funny that I was just like, yeah, I know this, and he was just kind of like, yeah.
It must have taken a lot of courage to go back into it after all those shitty experiences in the past, and like, God, I mean, you know, EMDR I'm training it actually, but it's a toss of the coin, like, because it's like some people, it's weirdly like magic, and I feel like I'm cheating, and then there's quite a lot of people who I'm like doing that, and I can feel that it's doing nothing, and I'm like, but again, you know,
was it Diana Doherty did it recently? She said, for her, it was on her, you know, her podcast with Sean Haggerty. That she was talking there about postnatal depression, and how her kid was really ill. Only she could soothe her. And she just always felt like if she leaves this kid, the kid's going to get sick and this kind of thing. So she said EMDR helped her, and she kind of taps her chest and. But I was sitting listening, and I was like, oh, no, I didn't like it. No, I was like vibrating stones in my hands, and I was walking in this field for 20 minutes, and she just was sitting in silence.
Smelling grass.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's nothing's for everyone, and I think that's really important. You know, like there's this it's an incredibly wanky phrase, but it's always in my head, is that you don't want to have a therapeutic monoculture. You know, so like statistics would say like, oh, CBT is really good, and then suddenly the government's like, okay, everyone have CBT, and it's like, well, no, because some people don't benefit from CBT. Some people would benefit from something sort of very person-centered, or EMDR, or psychodynamic, which is the whole previous stuff. I'm not sure, what was your last therapist doing?
CBT.
Oh, they were seeing CBT, yeah. And I think it's funny when you say that you came in like fully equipped with your backstory. I do kind of love clients that do that. Do you know what I mean? But
it was funny because it was 8 years after, so it wasn't like fresh or anything, and it wasn't really the main kind of problem, if you know what I mean. Like like whenever I went before, I was having nightmares, I was having flashbacks. Anytime it seemed to be when and now I still receive it now. If I'm really tired, I like if I'll go to bed and I'll think there's something in the room, or there's someone in the room, or there's a camera in the corner. It's really weird. But then that's because, again, this was me, because that's one of the, that and the toilet is when you're at your most vulnerable. So that's why I couldn't relax. But I'm grand most of the time. It's just if I find myself, I've had poor sleep the night before, I seem to be more hypersensitive. And then if I've poor sleep the night before and I go, say I walk to the shop and it's dark, and I'm kind of a bit hypervigilant, but I know I'm grand. It's just that kind of mind frame kind of creeping back in. But CBT I thought was very helpful. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So it helps you sort of reset whenever you feel threatened, which obviously is, that's the physiological side of PTSD, is like this threat drive. So that was something that kicked in the shop. Yeah.
In the what side?
Whenever you had the breakdown in the shop.
No, I don't think that was. I think that was just. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I think that they were two completely separate accounts. Yeah. But I think a lot of the time you were just talking, I was like, I'm miserable. My self-confidence is right down. I was in a job I didn't like. I was watching my friends progress, and I was kind of stuck in the same rut. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy for years, and then I was just like, I shouldn't be working here. I'm putting my health at risk. I'm putting people I know's health at risk. And then whenever we kind of talked about that, obviously it was like the 2-hour induction where it was like, so how's your home life and how's this and how's this and well, what kind of problem is this? So obviously that did have to come up at some point.
Sure.
But because it was 8 years deep, I think a lot of time with me, like when people ask me kind of how I felt about it, the first month I was fine, and then I remember it was Christmas Day and waking up and there was a wee old woman at the end of my bed, and I ran, turned on the light and she wasn't there. And that was the start of it. But the months and years after that, I just started to slowly get better and better and better, and I didn't feel as bad. But I don't know if I think it was just time. And then obviously, like, I was like, when I was speaking to him, it was like, I think it was because I was barely sleeping as well, because of the stress. No, the stress of COVID and lockdown, and I think that was why it was kind of creeping back up again, and I was feeling more hypervigilant and that kind of thing. So
I mean, it must have been infuriating being made to work like that. Like, whenever there was, as you say, there was a workaround, there was no need.
Yeah.
And then, like, at the time, of course, being outside felt like, like, I even remember looking outside the window and being like, isn't it weird that there's like a virus out there that can just kill you just outside? And it's like, obviously that's not really the I mean, I'm no denier of COVID, but it was
traumatized a wee bit.
It was more complex than just this cloud that chased you up the street. But it must have been absolutely raging, like, because just the unnecessariness of it, and you're saying that it was in a broader context of, like, I guess just frustration at the way life was going, I suppose, right? Because like you're saying about friends getting jobs and stuff, it can be hard not to live comparatively, because they always say, compare and despair, and it's like, well, you can't always just turn that off though, because like you use other people sometimes as markers as to where you are, and sometimes that's not healthy or helpful. But it's easier said than done to throw it away, because you can end up sort of wrestling with yourself in your head, and then that's just losing evening to thinking.
Yeah, like the CBT helped not just with the PTSD, but even like I write crime novels as well in my spare time, and I was like, I don't know why I do it, because no one cares, and he was like, I'm looking at your website right now and all these reviews, do you know them? And they obviously care, and like it's obviously just because my ego had such a pattern with the customer. It was mainly the customers, to be fair. It wasn't even that I was working it, and the stress of trying to cope with them and try and keep myself safe and my staff safe and the customers safe as well. But it was just like, why do you think that? Why do you think that there's no good when you've got the evidence here? Like, that's not your mum saying that this is brilliant. These are strangers saying, and the likes of, like, in my friendship circles, like, I don't know why I'm here, like, no one cares about me, and he goes, why do you think that? And so it was that the CBT around that and all was very good as well. So I think he was always kind of although maybe I didn't know it at the time, he was always using CBT to turn around my way of thinking, because I would think now, I would just go, oh, I'm just tired, or I'm thinking too much into it, or oh, it's because of that time when I was 14 and this boy said this to me, and that's why.
Yeah, it was like because what you're describing is very much the language of CBT there, like evidence and I suppose, did you say challenging? I guess it was kind of challenging.
Yeah. Challenging
the negative thought and everything, trying to lower your belief in it, because it does sound like there was a lot of evidence that people really like. By the way, what's your website?
Oh, it's just Amazon.
I'll look you up after. I don't think I have your second name, Brad, because you've been messaging me from the page.
From the last mental mate.
What's up?
I'll follow you on Instagram after.
Because I'm going to go on Amazon looking for like Brad, and then I'll like just type in mental mate surname or something, Okay, well I'm glad that you've got something as well, because like as I say, it can be an absolute ball ache to keep coming back to counselling, especially when it's been like negative in the past.
Well, the girl wasn't too bad. It was just but it was just the fact that I was there for the nightmares and for the hallucinations. I was going to say for the flashbacks, and like I remember it was maybe coming up to a year after it, and I remember walking to my uni, and I just like the thoughts that went through my head, like. I was like, there could be someone in that window now with a shotgun about to shoot me. And I was like, that's got nothing to do with the trauma I went through.
Yeah.
But it was just such a heightened, like, anything could happen. There's crime everywhere. I just remember thinking, right, I need to go back. And I got tossed around, and then that girl was really good. But it was just the fact she was like, so what about this, and what about your ex, and what about, and I'm like, I'm not here to talk about that, I'm here to talk.
yeah it's like I see what you mean. So there was like a good relationship, she was good at forming that, and that was helpful, but the modality then was too focused on sort of the past.
Yeah,
sounds probably.
Then we got into the nitty gritty, and she went off sick, and I was like,
fuck's sake.
But at that point it was like it had been 3 years, I think, since it happened, and I just thought, I just have to learn to live with it, and that's what I kind of tell people as well. Like, you do just kind of learn to live with it. Like, it does help to think, right, why am I thinking these are rational thoughts? And that's where CBT obviously comes in.
Sure.
It's all sleep with me. It's really weird. Like, I could walk to the shop now. It's dark, and I'd be like, right, I'm thinking I could be 100%, but tomorrow, if I have poor sleep tonight and I do the same thing, I could be like, right, well, you only had a couple hours sleep last night, you're running on empty, you haven't had, you're just kind of reverting back to that stage of paranoia, and it is all to do with, like you said, you're most vulnerable when you're sleeping or on the toilet. Like
I can see why that comes up, as well, because it's like, well, the thing about trauma is that it can be quite, it's sticky, so like it can attach itself to other experiences, and the simplest example is usually grief. You lose somebody who you're not that close to sometimes, and suddenly you find yourself weeping, and it's like probably unprocessed grief from a previous death, that these in the same way trauma can be like that and this isn't me saying it is all about the mugging, though. I more mean that, like, feeling unsafe going down to the shops can be from an experience where you felt unsafe going down to the shops, or it can be from a time you felt unsafe doing something else, that it tends to constellate, and then you have a lot of little mini traumas orbiting a central trauma, and it's a fucking mess. But it's an interesting one. Like, it's good that you came to some terms. I think I like what you said as well about, like, it's learning to live with it, because you could characterize that as a pessimistic statement, but to me it's like, and I don't think you meant it as a pessimistic statement.
No, I just think like you can become an agoraphobe and lie in the house and think everyone that comes to your front door is going to shoot you in the face, or you can just be like, right, well, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, it wasn't targeted,
right, I
didn't know who they were, they don't know who I am. That's just the way it is. Don't put yourself in that kind of situation again.
Yes, absolutely. Like, because I think that, like, I think I said this before, so I'm just gonna, I hope you don't mind if I repeat myself, but I'm currently working as a cognitive behavioural therapist, but with a charity that just, it lifts people out of the NHS waiting list and does the 6 sessions and all that, and that's grand. But main job is on a suicide hotline that operates in the south of Ireland, working from home. And you know, a lot of people who've been traumatized would say, like, how do I make this go away? How do I make these thoughts go away? How do I make these nightmares go away? And you know, the difficult answer isn't so much is that you can't make it go away in the same way that you can't make any memory go away. You know, things can be forgotten, but they're still there in the unconscious. They can be accessed when something brings it up, you know. But it's more so that the experience and the memory becomes integrated. It becomes part of you in a way that can be actually quite constructive or healthy, rather than something that you're fighting to repress, which can sometimes perpetuate it, you know. I think there was a similar metaphor used for grief years ago, where they drew a circle and they drew this pattern inside the circle, and they said, well, this is your grief. And we used to characterise it that over time the grief disappears, but it's not so much that the grief disappears. And then they drew a bigger circle around that circle and drew a new pattern in it, and said that the original patterns become part of this new pattern, you know, that it's something that becomes part of your life, that maybe you feel almost grateful for the time you spent with that person, or that it's something that provides meaning for you, you know, which is a big thing. Like, there was this therapist I really love called I'm sorry, I'm proper yammering. People are going to be like, this guy's a therapist, he doesn't do any fucking listening. But you got me started. Brad. There's a therapist I really love called oh my god, how have I forgotten him? He did this book called Man's Search for Meaning. God, I cannot believe I've forgotten his name. But he was a concentration camp survivor, and his form of therapy was all about meaning, because he found that in the concentration camp, one thing that helped him survive was having something to live for. So in this case it was his family, or the book that he was going to write when he got out of there. And then other people in the camp, you know, the ones who survived it was not necessarily a matter of strength physically or mentally, so much as it was having something meaningful, you know. He noticed that people who shared the meagre rations that they got were more likely to survive than those who hoarded, you know, for themselves. So, you know, his form of therapy was all about finding meaning in your life, and he said that you could find meaning primarily through 3 things. That could be creating something, so that could be art, or it can be a baby, you know. A baby's a meaningful thing to create. It can be through experiences, like sort of seeing the world, and I suppose relationships fall under that, you know. Relationship can be meaningful. And then the last one, the big one, is attitude towards difficult times, because he said, you know, I survived a concentration camp, you know, no one can take that away from me, you know. That's like the entire rest of his life is meaningful simply as a result of his attitude towards it, you know. And he talked about, it was an unorthodox way to talk to a grieving person, but it was an elderly woman grieving her dead husband, and he said, you know, well, what if the positions were switched and it was you who died and he who had lived? And she said, oh, he would not be able to handle that at all. He would not have been able to handle that at all. And he's like, oh, okay, well, this is the best possible scenario then, that you who can handle it has been the person who experienced the loss. It's not what I do with a client, but I always think it's a really interesting thing he did there, to sort of go, you know, as the person best equipped to handle this, isn't it wonderful and meaningful that you're isn't it meaningful that you're the person who got to experience it, rather than put him through the agony of your loss? Oh, it's going to drive me crazy. Do you mind if I Google?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you've got the laptop there. I might request you, if that's alright, could I?
So what was it called again, sorry?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning. It was
Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Yeah.
God, that's wild. I
think I've heard of him before, but a different kind of story about the concentration camp. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He does get quoted a lot. He's quite like a lot of motivational speakers, and folks would find him worth talking about, because he talked about how, and in a way this is kind of early CBT, but he said about how in between stimulus and response there is a space where you can interpret the stimulus in different ways. So, like, you know, you see a window and that's a stimulus, and the response might be panic, because in between you've thought there's a person with a shotgun there, or in between you might think that is just an empty window, and the response is different. So, like, saying ultimately that a person always has a choice, you know, in any scenario. So like he does get quoted. That does get quoted a lot. There's a much nicer way of putting it than I just did that he did. But yeah, so you might have heard it there.
I asked a question in the midst of my monologue, but how did you feel being in the midst of training and experiencing it yourself? Were you kind of like saying, oh, he's saying this because he wants me to say this, or?
Yeah, I always feel like I must be like a nightmare client, you know, whenever I go to therapy. Yes, I think I've been, God, well, there was the bad one, and then they've all been good after that. So like I would only really go back in when I have a big thing going on in my head, you know, and I overcome my own arrogance and go like, no, stop trying to deal with it yourself. You know, this is not what you would tell a client to do. But I would always think as a therapist, it probably makes me a nightmare client, that I sort of go in and I can see what they're doing and things like that. But you know, in hindsight, actually, you know, I've enjoyed a good working relationship with most of the therapists that I've had, because to say to somebody, I see that you're using this technique or doing this thing, it's actually very congruent in a way, you know, and congruence tends to encourage congruence. To be honest and open with someone tends to encourage the same, you know, and that's why it's such an important core condition, because the core conditions are all really just about encouraging vulnerability, and vulnerability is usually the gateway to getting better, I think, but to use a simple term, but so no, I actually think like at the moment now, I actually think maybe it makes me a good client, that it encourages a certain realness to go, and you know, like you, whenever you came to your final therapist, you sort of come there and you've done a lot of the work already yourself. You go, well, I do this and I self-sabotage through this and I gameplay through this and I do this or that or the other, you know. It's nice to be able to bring a comprehensive background, and not to go, let's start from there, because maybe that comprehensive background needs challenged, but it's like, here's a lot of stuff to work with, and some of it even in the exact right terminology, you know, and all that stuff. So that's my experience of therapy.
Are people surprised whenever you tell them that you're a therapist and you still go and speak to a therapist? Do people think, oh, what do you need that for? You know the tools to do it yourself.
Well, I think that's a good question, but you know, I don't get asked that much anymore, like because you know, mental health is such a big part of the national conversation now, that like. And I mean, and to be honest, it still needs to be. You know, I know some comedians who joke about maybe we need to re-stigmatise mental health, like because there's so much talk about it. But like on the suicide hotline, there's a lot of people that destigmatisation has not reached. Do you know what I mean? There's still people who feel like, oh, if I talk about it, that'll make it worse, or you know, like old misconceptions that you would think that we've moved past as a society, they're still very much there, and they still need to be challenged. And I don't care if a man on the street has heard that it's okay not to be okay for the 17 millionth time, because there's going to be someone who hasn't heard that it might be useful for. Yeah, no, I don't get asked that too often, but I do think it's good to lead by example, you know, to go, well, you know, even I go, like, because I think one of the worst things in the world, not the world, I'm exaggerating, but like a dangerous idea is that people have innate things, and by that I mean that if I come across as very mentally healthy, I don't want people to think Luke is naturally mentally healthy. I want them to think it's because he went and did this and that and the other, which means that they can do that if they want. If I'm just naturally innately mentally healthy, then it seems like an unattainable goal to somebody else. I feel the same way about comedy a little bit as well, that like somebody like Mickey Bartlett or William Thompson, who's just naturally funny. They're like somebody who people would say they have funny bones, and I'm like, no, there's no funny bones, right? Because like there's innate talent, like, which they're obviously brimming with, but like if you choose to see those people as that way, then you could never see yourself as ever getting remotely as funny as that, and it discourages you from even trying. and you know, like, while I do think there's a lot of stand-up is something that's innate, it's not totally innate. There's a lot that can be learned and crafted. And, you know, and running that open mic, one of my favourite things in the world is seeing someone who's been shit for years suddenly just figure it out one day. And there's multiple levels of that. There's people who've been great for 1 year, who become amazing, or people who go from good to great, you know, and it's such a privilege to see that. And it always reminds me of that how little is innate, you know. It's I suppose if you want to look up any academic literature on it, it's something called fixed versus growth mindset. Have you ever heard of that, actually?
Fixed versus growth mindset?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's what you're kind of saying, that, I can't do that because of this, and then it's like, that would be fixed, they're just not even going to try.
Yes.
And then growth is just, well, progress naturally kind of thing, is it?
I can be better at this if I do this or that or the other, you know, and obviously I'm grossly oversimplifying it, and I think whenever you hear the word mindset, it makes you think, oh, this is fucking some CEO self-help bullshit rather than a therapeutic idea. But it's by your woman does the research on grit, something Duckworth, or she's got a duck in her name somewhere. Terrible with names today. And grit being like, so this says, rather than IQ, which is largely a bit of a messy science, but if you could call it that, but grit would be an accurate predictor of a child's growth and success, and grit is sort of basically the ability to get up and keep going, and or to keep trying despite failure, you know. And if I remember rightly, sometimes even just educating kids about fixed versus growth mindset increases their levels of grit. But yeah, I went off on one there, but I just think it's really important to, and you know, obviously this is easier said than done, because you know, you might have some depressed listeners right now who sort of go, well, it's fucking very easy for you to say, oh, you can be better at something if you try or whatever, because when you're depressed you feel like incredibly, you feel in that fixed side of things, you feel completely stuck, and you know, it's very much a symptom of it as much as it is a cause. I guess maybe one of the difficulties with depression is all the symptoms are also causes. They tend to feed into each other like a snake eating its own tail. But it's kind of like CBT in that, well, in CBT you challenge your negative thoughts and then you replace them with something not necessarily more positive but more believable and less damaging, you know. Was that your experience of it, by the way? Yeah,
well, I was kind of like it was more these negative thoughts, why are you feeling like that, and replace it with the reason that's not true. Yes. It was kind of like, it was kind of to challenge how much truth is behind that statement,
right? Yes.
And then to try and get evidence to discourage that it is true,
right?
More than most things,
right? So properly taking it to court. Yeah. So would you not do the alternate thought at the end, where you come up with a new one, which is more? I suppose it's like the alternate thought's kind of like a bit more decorative, really. That it's less important than challenging the negative one, I think. But it would be like, say, I suppose going back to there's a person with a shotgun in that window, you know, you would challenge that and say, has there ever been a person with a shotgun in the window? Have you experienced that before? What would you say are the chances of that? Blah, blah, blah. Just sort of to damage your belief in the thought. And then they would say, well, what would be something like an alternative thought where you'd like, rather than saying, well, there's actually, there's never going to be a person in the window, there's never going to be any danger, you know, you wouldn't believe that, so it wouldn't stick. So you would need to go, well, like, well, there's the possibility that somebody out there wants to harm me, but it's very unlikely because that's only really happened once in my life, or, you know, in this context, which this situation does not share, and things like that. So you would take the grain of truth from the negative thought, because there's usually a grain, you know, like there's going to be times in your life when you're in danger. There's a grain, you know, and you put that there, but then you surround it with something a bit less harmful, more believable, but and like the reason that you're doing this and you're challenging these negative thoughts is that it's kind of like your brain is like, I'm going to use a metaphor. I'm preparing you because metaphors sound cheesy if you don't introduce them. It's kind of like if your brain's like a cornfield, right? And you're Theresa May, let's say. And if you go to a shop every day, you take a shortcut through the cornfield, same path every day. Eventually, there's going to be like a furrow and there's going to be a path made through the corn that's always there, and that's sort of where your thought is. That's a solidified sort of idea cognitively in you. And when you're doing CBT, it's like, well, I'm going to take this different path, and it's obviously not as easy now because there isn't a path worn through there yet. But if you keep doing it, you know, the corn grows back in the old path, and the new path gets made, and that's the new thought, the one that's less damaging to you. And I guess that's what I'm saying to keep in mind with, say, trying to consider fixed versus growth mindset from a depressive position. It's like, well, it seems the fixed mindset seems fixed in itself because that's the path that your brain has been taking for a while because of the depression, you know, a number of reinforcing loops. And I would not try and make someone think something new, but I would invite them to just consider it on the regular and maybe test it and find evidence that supports it, and maybe weigh up the evidence for the old path, you know, and see what comes out of that. But yeah, was that any good? Was that any cop as a metaphor?
Yeah, it was good. It was good metaphor. Yeah.
You keep a store of them.
I've never heard of a cornfield, but I've heard of like just if you're in the woods kind of thing, and you're going through the same path. I've heard of that metaphor before. That's
a good one actually as well. That probably takes a lot less time than to explain furrows in corn and everything. It's like, because who has experience of doing that? Like, whereas everyone's walked through a fucking forest, you know. I might alter that. I might keep that if that's right. Cause
that wasn't me came up with it. I don't know. God knows where I've heard that.
Well, I wouldn't be giving any credit to my clients. I wouldn't be like, by the way, I didn't write this. I lifted this. But I do think, you know, like, because metaphor is always a good way of explaining things, but also I do think it determines the success of a method, because some of the hypnosis folks are big into this, but like I only know a wee bit about hypnosis now, but like the different people have different metaphors for how therapy can move emotions and thoughts in you. And like, because whenever I first started, I remember somebody describing it as like, you're not trying to fix someone's life, it's more like they're like a series of pipes, the water's trying to get through, it's blocked, you just remove the blockage, the water moves on its own. And I was like, well, that's quite appealing to me. And then for some people it's like building something, or for some people it's like storing knowledge, or, you know, when you have self-knowledge that you have it forever, and things like that. Yeah, so I think that like metaphors can also determine the success of a therapy to people, because people have different characterizations of how their emotions move in their head, and it's good to try and work with one that sticks with them, you know.
And it must be really weird because every patient or every client would be completely different. Different things that they're going through, different ways they express, different ways that you can get them to open up. It must be just really but then I suppose that's the same as this podcast. Like I keep saying, what helps you, what journey did you go on, and everyone is completely different. Like I think what you were talking about earlier about running.
Yeah.
Someone could say, oh, like I know I personally like writing.
Yes.
And that kind of gets my dopamine going, and I could turn around to like my dad, for example, who couldn't write a text message, sends you a thumbs up, and say, oh, are you feeling bad? Just write down how you're feeling. He'd be like, fuck off.
that thumb up is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It's a thumbs down now.
Yes. And that thumbs down contains all the complexity of human emotion that your dad's experiencing right now. So.
But it's true, because you can't, like everyone's shit is completely different.
Yeah.
And it's good, but it's hard as well when you're trying to get around.
I think that's what I like about it, definitely, the complexity of it. But also, you know, more so on the helpline than in the other 6 session CBT structure, you know, because you get people off the NHS waiting list, you would get people who aren't necessarily like high risk, which is lovely, because it means you can work through some less urgent things. Whereas on the suicide hotline, I kind of like the exhilaration sometimes of the intensity of it. Like, this is a right now problem, and usually people who are calling a suicide hotline are people who've been in their perception failed by other services. You're kind of the last port of call, and usually you don't have a practical thing that you can offer them, but this is like, these are people who have not had the core conditions thrown at them in any remote sense. Usually, you know, if they've been failed by other services, then they feel they've been treated unempathically or judgmentally, and so, you know, the core conditions are at their most important on a suicide hotline. Whereas, you know, being empathic and non-judgmental and congruent with somebody who's by and large doing all right, they might go, well, I mean, you're nice, but that's not helpful, And so it's like, the two jobs require very different things. But yeah, there's a lot more variance, I would say, in the suicide hotline and situation, because standard CPT, you probably don't meet that many people who experience delusions or hallucinations. They're usually the domain of clinical psychologists or psychiatry and things like that. But there's a place for talking therapy in nearly everyone's form of recovery. Obviously, nothing's for everyone, as I say, and you don't want a therapeutic monoculture where one size fits all. Therapy's not for everyone, talk therapy's not for everyone, but usually, there's been good clinical results in really, really bog standard talk therapies for people with schizophrenia. Obviously, as long as it's delivered alongside other things as well. But people are always going to need to feel heard and not feel judged and feel like a person is being real with them. And that doesn't matter if they think they're the Pope from space or whatever, Sometimes, most of those people who think they're the Pope from space, everyone they've spoken to about it has gone, no, you're fucking not. So it might actually be quite helpful to go, well, how long have you been the Pope from space? How long have you felt like the Pope from space? Because you have to be congruent, I don't agree with delusions, but you can give people room to explore them because they usually haven't been given that. So yeah, there's always a place for that.
And for the two jobs, you said that they kind of go hand in hand. Would it help you to be a suicide helpline operator? Was that the correct term?
I don't really know, to be honest with you.
Does it help because you have studied it, or can anyone with any kind of training get that, or do you think it helps you?
I think it really does help. It depends, to be honest, because I know the Samaritans, they do their own training. They do a 9-week training. Childline I was in when I was about 19, I think, for a year. They do 9 weeks of training. Now the one I'm in, they do only recruit qualified people. I know that Lifeline also only recruits qualified folks, which I think is really what separates. I think there's you need the Samaritans. Samaritans deal with the bulk of calls, because the helpline I'm on, sometimes it's quiet for an extended period. There's only 3 of us on and none of us are taking a call sometimes for a while, whereas I know that the Samaritans is chock-a-block 24/7, and they also take people who aren't necessarily suicidal, who just want to chat, and lonely elderly, which is obviously there's a lot of that going on. But I do think there needs to be every place in the world needs a helpline that's got qualified folk behind it. It's just too. It's too important. And not to say that qualification means quality, because some of the worst counsellors I've ever seen were qualified, and some of the best ones I've seen were other student counsellors. I used to work in PIPS, which has a lot of student counsellors. It's a really good place. And it was they were very good to me. They were very good to me as I was studying. But some of the best counsellors I ever saw were there as well. So it's important to have regulated and qualified people working on helplines, and have volunteer trained ones as well. There's too much of a need for both of them really separately. I think I've forgotten your question, but I'm sorry.
No, you basically answered it. That's what I asked. And I hope you don't mind me asking. It's a bit of a personal question, but I was going to ask about the suicide helpline. But I suppose as a therapist as well, I can ask the same kind of question. How does it affect you mentally listening to this? Does it ever take a toll on yourself?
The odd time, the odd time. I think the thing is, I'm gonna sound really morbid here, but the thing is, you never really know if you've failed on a suicide hotline. If somebody dies by suicide after calling us, they're not going to call back, and their family's not going to call back, and so a lot of the time it's very easy for me to presume, because most of the time there's been times when I'm absolutely certain that someone has just died on the phone to me, and then and they've hung up and they're not answering the phone, and then I live with that, and then a week later they're on the phone and they're acting like that never happened. And so it becomes very easy for me to presume that someone survives, because it seems very rare that we've had an experience of some, like, cause as I say, I wouldn't find out if there was a successful attempt, and the unsuccessful attempt would call back, because surviving a suicide attempt, while uniformly a good thing, doesn't feel like a good thing to them. You know, a lot of people end up feeling more like a failure, whereas to me, I think it could be more characterized as a human instinct, a will to survive has succeeded, and that perhaps on some level maybe they feel more conflicted about the will to suicide than they admit. You know, usually the fact that they're calling a helpline at all implies conflict. Even if they say, I'm absolutely about to do this now, I'm just calling you to tell you I'm doing it. Like, if they don't immediately hang up, and they rarely do after saying that, and they hang around for a discussion, on some level there's a conflict there.
It's like the last chance saloon.
Yeah, there's a bit of them there, and you can speak to that, or you can speak to the bit that does want to die by suicide as well. You know, like, there can be quite an important discussion to be had, really, with them about it. Do I take it home though? I mean, I do it in home. I suppose I work from home, on the hotline anyway. The counselling's in person, but like, it's a difficult question, because I think I take it home if I feel like I failed someone, and I feel like I failed someone if afterwards I'm like, I was too distracted, I was not paying enough attention, I mean, I don't lose my temper, but I was irritable or something, you know, and like that feels like a failure. But you know, life is a series of opportunities to forgive yourself, and it's a practice that I have sort of down pat. I also have a little thing that I write on at the end of a shift to see if anybody stood out to me, and any thoughts on them. Sometimes I'll be like, could I have done this better, but more it's just about how it impacted me, and I reflect on that, and just, you know, and it's sometimes it's horrible, you know, because sometimes people are really mean, and so I might go, this guy's a fucking dick, you know, and I get it on paper, and then I mean, and I think, how can I voice that congruently next time we speak about it? Like, actually, I didn't really like it when you told me that I was a piece of shit or whatever, you know. Again, going back to the you bore me, finding a way to convey that, and you know, that's really helped, because there's been people I've had initially a very bad call with, and I'll be like kicking myself about it, and then a week later they'll call back now, and you know, and I'll have thought about how to talk about the last one and go, yeah, I didn't think you were getting much from me from that last call there, or you know, I don't think I was being very helpful with you in this manner, or I don't think you were ready to talk about this, and maybe I was pushing for this, and like, just getting real honest about my own failures with them, and as I say, honesty begets honesty, congruence begets congruence, and yeah, anyway, but I've not really answered your question, because I do think about that a lot, because I do get asked that a lot, and like, taking it home has never been that as much of a problem with me as it has been maybe for others, and you know, because it's my job in the hotline does have quite a high turnover, and sometimes I'm like, why he's leaving, this is great, you know. I think deep down I love connecting with people, or trying to connect with people, and the same applies to comedy, and I'm not a particularly social person either, so people who know me, who've heard me just say I love connecting with people, might go, fucking says 3 words at a party. It's like I will say 3 words at a party and I'll be happy, but what will really make me happy is if someone gets very drunk at the party and starts talking to me about times they've self-harmed. I'm like, this is fucking great. Like, after a gig we did in Cork, it was me and Jordan Robinson and this guy called Jack McGee, who's fucking brilliant, great comedian that not enough people have heard of, and oh god, who else? There was a bunch of us. See, I'm bad with names today, but we drank a wee bit after. We don't usually drink that much after gigs, and one of the people we were with, just told, kind of a stranger really, started talking about self-harm and stuff, and I could feel the sort of the group dynamic changed, and I was like, this is absolutely my jam right now. Like, the people crying on the stairs, I'm like, I will absolutely. I'll bring a tissue and I'll go home feeling great. Like I don't know what it is, but I really like connecting to people on that level, and so it always kind of feels like its own reward to me, even if it's maybe a bad session or a bad call. As I say, if I've been given them core conditions, if I feel like I've connected, then it feels valuable, you know. And like I think because there's a funny dynamic even emerging between us, because I've spent half of this going like, oh, I'm talking too much, and then a minute ago you described yourself as having given a monologue, and it's like, no, bro, that's like the 5 seconds I gave you to speak throughout the whole book. Do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes it's I thought it would be important for me to call that out, that I didn't think you were delivering a monologue, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. I guess when I'm saying like, oh, I'm talking too much, I'm afraid of giving, see this congruence right now, I'm afraid of giving off the image of like someone who sees himself as a therapeutic maestro but talks about themselves over and over again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just sharing that with you.
And I suppose we haven't really talked a lot about the comedy.
Yeah.
Do you think it kind of goes hand in hand with mental health?
I try and make it do that. I try and make them work together. And I have a good few wee bits about therapy. But like, I think I've written about, well, I don't know how much I've written, but I've performed 3 different hours of stand-up in the 10 years I've done it. There was about 5 or 6 years where I wasn't trying very hard, and coasting, and a lot of us were as well. Actually, it was whenever there was between about 2014 and 2017, 18 or something. A lot of us were like, "This is grand, you know. I've got my good 10 minutes. I'll just take that around the country forever." And then I think it was like whenever Colin Geddes did the SSE, suddenly it was like, "Oh, there's a much higher ceiling here that can be reached." Because before that, it would be like your best hope would be. The best gig probably would have been like doing the opening 20 at the Empire, you know, like, and you wouldn't have headlined unless you'd done TV or something. Well, I don't know actually, like, but none of us other than Mickey would have been doing that, you know, at the time. So that was sort of where we all thought the ceiling was, and then Colin heightened the ceiling, and then suddenly we were all trying. And then there was the pandemic, which actually also I think made us all try very hard whenever we came back, because it was like, there's an audience now. So a lot of us were performing to 7 or 8 people above a pub somewhere a lot of the time before that, you know. But yeah, I don't think it goes hand in hand as much as I'd like it to. I would love it to be a fully in sync thing, but I think out of the 3 hours that I've done of stand up, there's maybe been about 10 minutes in each one that have been about comedy or mental health. I guess part of me, I don't want to be like, this guy doesn't fuck up about mental health on stage. I don't want to be that. No. But I also, I don't want to have something that takes up 80% of my life not be something that I talk about a bit, you know? Yeah. I think as well, I'm just very careful telling jokes about it, because, you know, if you... I mean, you just want to be careful with your words mocking mental illness in a way, because, you know, somebody might take that the wrong way. And by that I mean, I might put it the wrong way. I don't mean to put the blame on them. Like, if I talk about... I used to have a couple bits about the suicide hotline, which you can imagine would be a hard thing to write about. And so I would talk about maybe broad things that people would do on the helpline, like downplay their own pain, for example. Like, this isn't the joke, so you don't have to laugh at the end of it, but like, I hate the social pressure of one comedian telling a joke to me, and I'm like, fuck, when do I laugh, you know? But it would, like, people would downplay their pain a lot, you know. They'd be immediately ready to hang up. They'd be like, oh sure, it's nothing, mate, honestly, I'm overreacting, it's stupid, I'm making this up, I'm not even sad. And you go, well, where are you right now? And they'd be like, well, I'm standing on a stool right now with a rope around my neck. And it's like, but it's nothing serious. And it's like, actually, it does sound pretty serious. But you know, if you were to joke about stuff like that, you have to joke about the behaviour rather than the person, you know, because the joke there isn't that a person's being stupid, it's that somebody probably from a compassionate place is afraid that they're taking up my time with their own pain, which they see as insignificant despite the fact that it so clearly is. So, you know, you're making fun of the problem rather than the person, and that sometimes that can be a difficult needle to thread, you know. The last show I did was about like defense mechanisms, you know, like, which is basically, it's a psychoanalytic term for to simplify it. It's, am I running overtime, by the way?
No, you're fine, keep going.
Right. It's a bit of simple. It's like anything that people do to avoid maybe a difficult emotion or thought or truth, you know. And so classic example might be somebody who was maybe physically abused by their parents. Maybe they were hit a lot as a child. They might go, well, I was dead naughty and I deserved it, you know, as a defense mechanism to sort of avoid the pain of being hit by your parents, and then, you know, in a way, I suppose, showing a lack of love, maybe, I don't know. But so like the last show will be talking about the ways in which we avoid feelings and things like that. And there's also just normal jokes, but, you know, there was only that a little bit about mental health, and I wanted it to be more about that. So I had a little, what I had was at various points in the show, I had a little chair that was labelled twat, and because I didn't want to, like, I thought talking too much, see, it's a defense mechanism in itself, because I'm not just being congruent and saying, I want to talk about mental health now. I would go, oh, it sounds quite twatty for me to talk about mental health, so I'll have a clearly labelled chair that I go to, and this is where I go to be a twat. So I go there and I talk about various mental health stuff and defense mechanisms and avoiding feelings and things like that. It's on YouTube, actually, that hour.
Is it?
But yeah, if you YouTube my name, there's a YouTube account. It's got some clips, but there's a full 50-minute show on there. As well as some clips of me from like 2013 when I started, and I was trying to do a character on stage. I was trying to do this thing where I'd be like really high energy and stuff, and it's like, it's very entertaining for 5 minutes. If you did that for an hour, you'd be fucking sweating, you know what I mean, on the ground, and people's attention needs to be able to disappear from you for a little minute if you're doing a longer show as well. So, and you're making that harder if you're running about and fucking shouting and all that stuff. Didn't suit me, but anyway, so there's some cringe there up on the old YouTube. It's not on my account, but it'll come up if you search my name. Like,
well, I took two things from that. The one thing I took was something that advice I've been giving myself, which a lot of authors give, is write what you know.
Yes, yeah.
And I know, like, I've spoke before in the podcast about this, that a lot of my books I can be like, yeah, that's me. Like, one I released actually after lockdown, it's called Who's Next?
Nice.
And it's about this man that's working in retail and just cracks a bap and kills the customers. and like, I was like,
where'd that come from?
I wonder where that come from. Like, I don't think that takes much psychoanalysis. But yeah, like, I think what you were kind of saying is you don't want to be known as that, but it is what you know.
Right.
And it's probably like your niche as well. Like, how many other comedians or therapists that you know?
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's in a way, it's incongruent, I suppose. I know I keep using that word, and I think it ties in with defense mechanisms anyway, because the defense mechanism keeps you from being congruent. You know, it serves you at some point. Like,
yeah.
Like, not speaking too openly about mental health all the time probably served me at one point, or not being open in that way probably helped, because like, you know, maybe in school or something, you know, it was a different time when I grew up. Nobody really talked about feelings and things like that, and that's not good. But it also probably wouldn't have been helpful for me to do it back then, because people would have been like, "What's this fucking guy talking about? Talking about thoughts that he's had are fucking deeper than a fucking thimble," you know. You know, because I wasn't particularly deep. You know when someone like says, "Oh, that's a very deep thing," and you have not said something very deep, and like, it breaks my heart when I hear that, because I'm like, oh, you've not been given the opportunity to be vulnerable and to talk about something, you know. But yeah, defense mechanism is something that serves you, but ultimately, if it prevents you from being congruent, it's kind of getting in the way of you feeling mentally healthy, you know. And that doesn't mean be quote unquote brutally honest, which is a fancy term for being a bit of a prick. People are like, I just tell it like it is. It's like, no, you tell it. You say the first mean thing in your head. You know, congruence is taking that mean thing and finding a way to articulate it in a way that they might listen, or that doesn't ruin their fucking day. But yeah, I think, yeah, to sort of go, oh, I don't want to talk this much about mental health, I don't want to be the mental health comedian, is incongruent, because ultimately that's what I am. So thank you for that. That's a good point.
And the second thing I was going to say, which you actually brought up, was the defense mechanisms and comedy. I think a lot of people do say like they use comedy to kind of deflect, but also like I've had people on the podcast and we've had great talks and chatted and laughed, even though we were talking about deep things. And like,
yes,
do you think there's a fine line between the defensiveness, the deflection in comedy, and using comedy to introduce the subject and kind of not kind of deflect it as in wrap it up as if there's nothing wrong with it completely, but kind of present it in a way that's more comfortable to other people?
Yeah, to make it digestible.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think you're on to two good points there, because like one of them is like jokes are a defense mechanism. Freud characterized them as that they are ways of making fun of things that were scary, which is why so many men and male comedians would do jokes about sexual failure, because we're all terrified of failing sexually, and why so many female comedians joke about being killed and murdered by men, because that's what they're scared of, so like I do think you're hitting on something there that's important, because you can use jokes to avoid it, and you can use jokes to deflect, but also a defense mechanism can be Freud had them on a scale of I suppose healthiness. I can't remember the phrase for it, but the highest one was something called sublimation, which is basically if you channel your pain into an art, which you've done with that book actually. So that's a healthy defense mechanism, rather than sitting and going, I wish I want to kill all these fucking customers. Channeling it into actually good art, whereas a joke can be good art. It can also be avoidance, but it can, if you do it right, as you say, you can make a point about something emotional and make it digestible. Yeah, I should probably go.
No, that's fine. Sorry I didn't run you over.
That's all. No, I ran me over. It's my own bloody fault.
If I can just steal your attention for 2 minutes, we finish every podcast asking if you are in a bad place or if you're down. What advice, which I suppose we're kind of contradicting what we were just talking about, but what advice would you give? Like, what do you do that makes you feel better and come out of that rut?
Gosh, well, there's some of the boring answers, which is like I've gotten really gymmy this year. I like the gym and all, but and I do love a wee bit of the unmindfulness, other meditations like metta, loving kindness meditation, things like that, but I don't want to just give too bog standard an answer. I suppose something that I find really helpful when I'm in like crisis, when I'm really low, is like I have a really big chat with myself while driving somewhere, which, to be honest, it really terrifies the other passengers on the bus. No, but I sort of stupid.
That's a deflection.
It's a deflection, isn't it? But yes, I would drive somewhere, and what I would do is I would say sort of out loud to myself what I'm angry about, but then also in between that I would do something which I suppose is meditative, but I think it's as good on its own practice, is to label everything. So I would say, well, I'm pissed off about this, and then I would say tension in my chest, soreness in my head, feelings of anger, thoughts of destruction, or whatever, and I would say this out loud, and then I would say these labels out loud about thoughts, feelings, physical, maybe any sort of temptation towards behaviour, because feelings come with impulses, anger comes with an urge to tense or hit or something, depending. So I would have a big chat with myself in the car. I would maybe respond to these statements, but mostly it's about the labelling things as they come, because to label it can take away some of its power. And you turn your awareness to something. Sometimes that alone is curative. Awareness alone can be everything. Sometimes, I mean, not always the case, but it's a good start. One of the worst gigs I've had in years was in Portrush 2 years ago now, and I don't know what it was. It was like life-changingly bad, because it's a 2-hour journey home in the car from Portrush on my own, and because usually you're driving with other comics, but nope, on my own, and basically just like getting real mad. Like, first I was angry at the crowd, but then I was angry at myself, and then I was angry at other comics who would have gone down well with that crowd, and then I kept going, and I was labeling things. Other stuff was coming up, and I was thinking about the worst relationship I'd ever had, which is 2012, and you fucking know who you are. But she doesn't. But and you know, and feelings coming up from that, and then ultimately sort of coming to a new position on that, because you know I talked about that relationship in therapy for years, and sometimes I still do, and but it was the first time I'd come to terms with my own responsibility in that relationship about letting some of that stuff happen, you know, and like that's a position you should come to after a while, because if you come to, well, how am I at fault too early in your recovery from a traumatic relationship, you're going straight to shame rather than, okay, well, we've talked about all the things that were bad about this person, now you know, because the phraseology of, oh, I let this happen it's not it's quite self-blaming, and there's a place for guilt, because guilt's when you do something wrong, but there's rarely a place for shame, which is when you see yourself as something wrong, and so you come to your responsibility in the matter after you've talked about all the other stuff, because otherwise you're going to come to your own responsibility in a bad way, which is just shame, which is just, oh, I'm the worst thing in the world, which puts you in a fixed mindset, and you'll never see any reason to improve, because you're like, I'm a piece of shit, or you'll go, well, why are we talking about me when this person's clearly the person at fault, you know? So I do think there's a better order of these things, but anyway, I've gone far away from the answer, which is about having a wee drivey chat with myself and doing some emotion, thought, physical labelling as I do it. Yeah.
But it's interesting you said about the driving, because I've heard of other people, kind of, not on this podcast surprisingly, but they find driving very therapeutic, especially if you need to talk to someone, because you're both just focusing on the road.
Were these all men?
No, I think it was like just through research from the podcast and like listening to other podcasts and like things I've heard of, and I've actually give that advice as well, like saying go a drive with someone. If you need to talk to them, your focus is on the road. They can't leave.
Yes.
They can't storm out. And it's just it's kind of like therapeutic in a way.
Yeah.
I know why. I would drive from Derry to Belfast a good lot, and I think it is when you're kind of thinking a good lot, and in the shower as well. People say the showers where you win your fake arguments though.
You do need a little distraction. I think that's what the driving is. I think that's what the showering is. It's sensation. It's something to keep you just a little bit. And in a way, it's kind of like EMDR in a way, which is like shifting your focus into different directions and to help you process something. Again, oversimplifying, but like I hope I don't mean to come across as generalising when I say was it all men. It's actually just something I've been reading about lately, about the ways in which men and women share feelings and discuss feelings with each other, and with women it's often a lot of face-to-face stuff, because it's like proper good contact, because they're better able to handle that, whereas with men, there's the ever so slight fear, like, if I look you in the eye I'm gonna fucking crumple, so it's usually shoulder to shoulder activities, looking at something, playing a video game or something, or driving, and obviously nothing's for everyone, as I say, and I don't want to say there's a mono solution, but for each gender. I guess I'm just saying this is where trends appear to be socially, in terms of talking about feelings, so if you want to get a guy to open up about his family or something, don't fucking look at him, I don't know, take him to a quarry or a river or something, look at that and stand next to him, and then ask him the deep shit, but,
just not at a urinal.
Not at a urinal. That's too much distraction. You're both having a piss, and suddenly the person next to you's like, do you know, sometimes my father doesn't know how to connect to me. And you're like, and then he goes, I see you're drinking a lot of water there, very clear.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. I'll let you go because I know you have to run.
Run the pavilion.
So I'll tag you on Instagram anyway. And you have you did have a podcast. Is it not as active now?
It's pretty much retired. I think we were going to have a proper closing episode. We might still. Yes, but I am happy with it. I haven't listened to it in a long time, so maybe I'm not actually. Maybe I'm afraid of listening to it and I'll have changed position on a lot of things because a good mind is good at changing. It's called Therapy Geeks. It's me and my friend Louise Taylor, who's also a therapist and was a comedian for a while, talking about various therapeutic topics in a lighthearted manner. So the archive is still on my link tree on my Instagram. So if you want to listen to that, check it out. It's I think it's good. I haven't listened to it in a long time. I hope it's good.
I had a quick wee look today, and it seemed like every episode was a different subject. So even if some people might think, I don't need help with grief or I don't need help with relationships, there's something that could be there that could help them.
So I think we cover quite a broad range of things, and I think it was just I would make sure I'd research the shit out of every topic before we did it. So it would take me far too long to make episodes because. And I think and Louise is such a great spirit. I think because she was just like, sure, just do it, and I'd be like, oh, but I wanna throw some fucking academia about, which is probably just putting it off. Not just having trust in the fact that we're both knowledgeable people. Anyway, so it's worth checking out. I would say there's some clips on Instagram as well, just of me doing some stand up. And some little sketches, and same on TikTok. I would love you to follow me, but no pressure.
Well, thank you very much. It was a really interesting chat. Went on for a bit. It's been one of my longest episodes, but sure, it's all golden anyway. So
happy days. Thank you.
No problem.
I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you again. Anyone negatively affected by this week's episode, there are a number of links in the bio to help. That's all from me. I will see you next week on That's Mental Mate.